Well, the booklet contains information for businesses and for individuals so they can plan for a no deal Brexit. So, for example, there is a section, first of all, which explains everything the government has done in relation to the planning, which explains the planning assumptions, a reasonable worst case scenario that we're looking at and planning for. There's another section which is especially for individuals, so that covers areas like passports, pet passports, identity cards, healthcare, things which affect all citizens really. A third section deals with the business community. There's things like, for example, the .eu domain, if you happen to have that, issues like data protection, financial services, aviation. So that is section 3. And then the fourth part deals with the Spanish contingency measures. You will recall that at the request of Spain, the European Union excluded Gibraltar from its contingency plans, except in relation to the visa regulation, where we're included with that terminology of a colony, that offensive terminology. But we were included in it nonetheless. But Spain included us in its own contingency plans, which apply to economic operators and citizens, British citizens in the United Kingdom or in Gibraltar. And so there's a link to the full text of that of the Spanish Decreto Real. And there's also a special link we've included for British citizens who live in Spain, who may have a particular interest in finding out what exactly it is that they're supposed to do in their circumstances.
It's all very complicated. Nobody really knows what's going on with Brexit. So how highbrow is the booklet?
And I think it's clear and it's easy to read and it's well laid out and well set out. But I think you're right when you say it's complicated, because really nobody knows quite what is going to happen, and we have been preparing, as we've often said, for a deal Brexit, going with a withdrawal agreement and with memoranda and along that path, and also preparing for a no deal Brexit at the same time. And sometimes there are hopeful signs emerging from Brussels in terms of the UK-EU discussions. Other times they're less hopeful, and this changes from day to day. And part of the uncertainty of planning is that the background against which we're planning keeps on changing all the time.
This week we had queues at the frontier. It was put down to the fact that Spain was practicing its no-deal contingency plans. What was it, and is that what we can expect?
Well, as you know, there are times when the frontier operates better and when it operates worse, even with us in the European Union. So I don't know whether it's a bit of that. But the reality is that if they're preparing for a no-deal Brexit, then they need to provide the necessary resources at the border to be able to do that. That is what European Union law states in the Schengen Border Code. So to be able to in order to systematically check every person crossing in either direction, the code says you have to provide the resources to be able to do that.
Does it apply when we're not in the European Union?
Yes, it does. I mean, that legal framework applies whether we're in Europe or whether we're not in the European Union, either way. Because we're not in Schengen, it applies today, and it will apply if we leave the European Union as well. But there are other safeguards too. I mean, the code itself provides for example, border guards to wave through regular crossers or regular commuters that they recognize, so they don't have to check every single person if they don't want to. So we don't know whether this was an exercise related to Brexit or whether it wasn't, but certainly what the law says is that they have to provide the necessary resources to be able to conduct the checks.
We're looking at worst case scenarios. What is the worst case scenario?
Well, our worst case for planning purposes has been a 2-hour queue to exit Gibraltar, a 6-hour queue for goods vehicles. So we have planned on that basis, and we call it a reasonable worst case scenario. It doesn't mean that that's going to happen, because it could be that we don't see those.
What does a reasonable worst case scenario mean? Surely an unreasonable worst case scenario would be 4 hours.
No, well, the worst case scenario of all is that the border is shut, and then we need to plan for that. So we're not planning for that worst case scenario. We're planning for something which is obviously far removed from that, because everybody has said the border is not going to close, and everybody has said they want to maintain a fluid and an open border in both directions. So our planning has been based on a reasonable worst case scenario. That is what the contingency plans which the teams of civil servants have been working on.